Welcome to the Mirror Media Podcast with Mukunda Raghavan.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Mirror Media Podcast. I'm your host today, Mukunda Raghavan, and I am joined by a special guest. I say all the time special guests, but all my guests are very special because they come with unique backgrounds, understanding, and information for us to think about, digest, and incorporate. Today's guest is actually Professor Lavanya Vemsani. She is a professor of both religious studies and history at Shawnee State University, which is in Ohio. She is an expert in both Hindu studies and Jain studies, which is a really interesting dynamic. And we've had one or two professors on previously that have some expertise in Jain work, but she's actually done quite a bit of deep exploration between the symmetries of Jain iconography and mythology, or not, I wouldn't say mythology, but stories and epics along with the Hindu side. So Professor Vemsani, thank you so much for joining us and welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Namaste. So Professor, can you tell us a little bit about your background and like kind of your educational background and then your professional background to get a sense of how you came to where you are now?
Okay. Very humble beginnings.
Okay.
I come from a small village, but family that placed value on education.
Mm-hmm.
And my family especially did not push me into any one subject. So they allowed me to pick the subject that I liked.
Mm-hmm.
I actually began with going into, biology and all that, and then switched into history.
Yeah.
And arts curriculum, and then of course most of my education is in Hyderabad. I did masters at Osmania University, and then MPhil and PhD at University of Hyderabad in history, and then I went for further studies in Canada, McMaster University.
Mm-hmm.
In religious studies. History, of course, was very nice, but historical artifacts in the ancient period, they're like silent, you need this other aspect of it, and religious studies complements it,
Mm-hmm.
early history, and so at McMaster, I did history of religion.
Wow. So where in India are you from originally? I'm guessing somewhere in Andhra Pradesh or what is now Telangana.
Telangana, yeah. Now it became Telangana.
Yeah.
So originally from Khammam district,
Mm-hmm.
a small village. It's now in I think Khammam district. Still.
Okay. So if I can ask, coming from a smaller village, was going out to get your PhD in college, was that like a different experience than what you would assume a lot of people coming from urban environments would have? Was it tougher? Was it a little more of a challenge?
It is, but my family supported me, as I told you.
Mm-hmm.
The family placed value on education. So,
right.
Yeah, it is difficult, but I qualified for all the entrance exams and scholarships and everything. So it is difficult,
yeah,
to
because
go out and do things. So
I always wondered that because it's a lot of people that end up getting their PhDs and getting becoming as highly distinguished and qualified as you are tend to come from much more urban environments where access to education and access to different kind of modern lifestyle is much more at hand. And and a lot of people, even in the U.S., don't understand the distinction between village life versus urban life because America is so urbanized, right? So the Indian context is so different.
Yeah.
So, what drove you to kind of want to get into history? I mean, why did you pick that of all subjects at first?
The district I grew up is very rich in ancient culture. So, the Khammam district has a number of places that show continuity. Khammam district is one district that has the river Godavari,
Mm-hmm.
so there are monuments Even when we were walking, there are monuments. And some of the monuments are identified actually as Paleolithic hand axes, but they're actually installed in the temples, Hanumanji's temple, Ram temple.
So what do you mean these Paleolithic sites the temple was built around them? Or is that kind of what you're saying? Like these sites go back so far and they built a temple around them?
Yeah. So have you seen, you're from urban center? From a town?
Yeah, my mom was born in somewhere close to Tirunelveli, and I was born in Madras, but I lived all my life in the U.S. in pretty much an urban or suburban environment. So I don't really my only exposure to village life has been whenever I go back to the family village and spend a week or so there or a few days there. I'm not very much exposed to it.
In South India, the temples are, the village goddess temple, Hanumanji's temple. There are small temples, but they're on the street side, and they're of course very well preserved and loud structures, but they're there. Of course, when I was growing up, I didn't know there are Paleolithic monuments, megalithic monuments, and all that.
Yeah.
Megalithic monuments, the local stories, megalithic monuments, they call them as the Ram lived here, and this is where Sita dried her saris, and the stories.
Yeah.
So these huge megalithic monuments, Paleolithic monuments, the hand axes are they look like this. Hand axes, you probably have seen them. So they're actually put like a deity and central deity in temples. So I figured that out only when I came to Hyderabad. But because there are others, faculty, other people who were identifying them. But they fascinated me. And it was, what is this? What is going on here? What is our history? What are these structures? Really, did Ram really visit here? Did Sita dry them here?
Yeah.
So it's fascinating stories, So got into history, ancient history. And then went on to find out all these things. In fact, Central University actually has a megalithic monuments at its entrance.
Oh, wow.
To enter to the Central University, there is a huge, 150-foot tall, standing megalithic monument.
Wow.
Yeah, so they're fascinating. You're like, oh, how did they stand this huge? It's like huge rock. How did they stand it? And it did not fall in 3,000 years or 2,000 years.
So megalithic, again, I mean, as for some people that might not know, refers to a period, I think somewhere between 3,000 to 5,000 years ago. Is that right? Or is it a little bit later than that?
They're dated between, they're prior to history. Their beginning is, sometimes historians differ on it. Sometimes historians place it together with megalithic and Neolithic. In South India, it's difficult to actually separate them because as the stages continued, you have the Neolithic. Neolithic actually involved very fast. But right beside Neolithic, the earlier lifestyle, the Mesolithic lifestyle continued, and also the megalithic also evolved. So you have parallel lifestyles in some of the sites that archaeologists have excavated. And of course, you also have Buddhist monuments. In some places, Buddhist monuments are actually built right on top of the megalithic monuments.
Interesting. So yeah, it's basically a continuous civilization for at least a few thousand years before Christ, if we want, or before the Common Era. Wow, that's not many places in the world can actually have that kind of testament, right? It's unique. Right. And I feel like South India is covered in it. Like everywhere you go, every town or village has some sort of megalithic or Neolithic structure that's connected to that village.
Right.
So you got into history.
That's what I studied.
Yeah.
So I went for my MPhil, and I studied these, early inscriptions and how civilization, from 6th century to 12th century. And then I wanted to really study these early monuments. So I studied the early settlement patterns for my PhD. So these are these monuments and these, continuity, and these are the things I studied for my PhD at Central University, Hyderabad Central University. Then,
so did you have field work?
Huh?
Did you do field work? Did you go out to the field and stuff like that? Or was it mostly scholarly? Okay. Oh, wow.
Yeah, I went out to look at these monuments and, visited the museums where some things are brought and put in preservation and all that. Yeah. Wow.
That must have been going back to look at these monuments with the eyes of a scholar or historian must be very different from viewing it as like a child or someone without that knowledge of the history.
Right. And it's fascinating, the megalithic monuments and some of these early monuments are, studied in those days, and some of them identified them with the Ramayana path. And the stories I heard also, so connect to so it's fascinating, but you would examine more and you would see Neolithic, megalithic, and all these sites, but they're still silent for you. You don't, so everyone is giving, their own different theory. But the fascinating thing is there is a continuous civilization. The sites continue. The sites are, not abruptly stopped, not, occupied by a different culture and all that. The Neolithic, megalithic, all these are continuing. And you also see different pottery, different artifacts coming from different cultures. The Harappan pottery in Indus Valley pottery. Sometimes Indus Valley, kind of stylized drawings, and they're also found on potsherds in megalithic monuments. So it's fascinating, but.
Yeah, so I
have to go for the religious studies. So how can we understand our culture? What happened before?
No,
we have all these things, continuing things, but what about the story? How does this go?
I remember. So when we were younger, my dad would take us on basically a temple tour through South India. We'd go to Andhra Pradesh and go to Tamil Nadu, Karnataka, everywhere. So I remember going to these temples that were, ancient. We don't know how old, but they're at least like 1,500 years old, if not earlier, right? So, and then there'd be, I remember this Narasimha temple we went to where you go through a tunnel, and they say that in the tunnel, Prahalada did his meditations for a while. So I remember these structures were so connected to a deep history that it's almost like it's part of the earth, the soil, and the environment within these areas.
Right. So somehow I think they understood the importance of these monuments or these stone tools that they found, probably to place them in a sacred place.
Yeah.
So whatever stories they might have constructed, but they understood the importance. Somehow the idea of this importance and continuity is passed on to them.
Yeah. So you did your PhD in Central University, and then did you teach in India, or did you decide immediately to go to Canada to do your master's? Your second PhD. Sorry.
I did a little bit of teaching, not much. But I applied for my second PhD while I was still finishing up my first PhD.
Okay.
So I actually went back to do the defense, my PhD defense. So, so while I was finishing it, I came to.
That must have been a crazy amount of work, juggling basically two PhDs at once.
Right.
So when you did your PhD in McMaster's, what was your focus there?
It was the Hindu and Jain stories, you know. So I picked Balarama.
Yeah.
Study. So I studied 4 Hindu texts and 4 Jain texts, because both of them are ancient enough and both of them have parallel stories.
Okay.
So I wanted to see how they preserve the stories.
Yeah.
Both of them. So for Hindu, I did Harivamsha, Vishnu Purana, Brahma Purana, Bhagavata Purana. And for Jain, I did Antakatha Dasavo and Vasudeva Hindi and Harivamsha, again Harivamsha.
But their Harivamsha is different, yeah.
Yeah. Their version is a little bit different.
Yeah. So from you wrote a book on this too, and I've read quite a few of your articles covering Krishna and Balarama in both Jain and Hindu contexts. So most people understand Krishna and Balarama in the Hindu context. What is the role of Krishna and Balarama and their story in the Jain context?
In the Jain context also, they're very important. Both of them, they're cousins of Neminatha. Neminatha is a very important. Yeah. So they're important as his cousins, but somehow they place more importance on Balarama and Krishna, of course, important, but the story is changed a little bit. And one important aspect that Jain stories have is, you know, they actually add past life stories for Krishna and Balarama. So Vasudeva Hindi has the past life stories, and Chaupanapur Mahapurushacharya also has past life stories. So the past life stories actually make Balarama's life story is much more positive, much more of a deity standing for Dharma.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, you know, it's always interesting to me because in both the Mahabharata, Harivamsha, Vishnu Purana, Balarama has a role, but it's almost always secondary. And then in his stories, it's also, he's portrayed as like a kind of a Bhima-esque character. He's strong, powerful, but he's a drunkard. He likes to drink and he likes to engage in fights. And, you know, like he's the one, like a lot of people don't know, he's the one that ends up killing Rukmini's brother after he gets cheated in a dice contest way later. So the story of Balarama is interesting in the Hindu sense, but I think in the Jain sense, isn't he? I mean, there's a concept, I think, in the Jain, if you want to explain it, the Vasudeva, Prati Vasudeva, and then there's the other one. Is that the other one Samkarshana? Is that what the third role is?
Yeah, he's called more as Samkarshana. So they are Vasudeva and Baladeva.
Yeah.
They're in this cycle of births, you know. So with Tirthankara, there are always Vasudevas and Baladevas, and also the Prati Vasudevas, you know.
So can you explain those concepts? Because a lot of Hindus don't know any of this stuff. So a lot of people generally don't. I don't even think a lot of Jains know. So it's always interesting because I'll talk to Jains about it. They say they worship sometimes Krishna, but they don't know this theory of Vasudeva, Prati Vasudeva, and Baladeva. Would you mind?
Oh, Baladeva and Vasudeva, it's in the cosmology, Jain cosmology, they maintain an important role in keeping the, you know, Jain universal role. That's the reason they are born every time Tirthankara is born. And so Neminatha and Baladeva was there. So the same names are given to the prior incarnations also. So you would see incarnations, you know, Rama and Lakshmana also categorized as Baladeva and Vasudeva. Of course, Tirthankara, it's about monasticism and, you know, brahmacharya and all that. But Vasudeva and Baladeva in a different aspect. So they do the dharma of keeping up Kshatra dharma, but within the cosmos of, you know, vanquishing the Prati Vasudeva. And
Mhm.
Prati Vasudeva need to be vanquished so that, you know, the universal peace is maintained.
Yeah.
And Jainism, of course, you know, is all about maintaining this universal peace. So as maintainers, as someone who is involved with maintaining this universal peace, Baladeva and Vasudeva, both of them have a very important role.
Yeah. Within the Jain cosmology, I also know that, you know, is it Vasudevas tend to go to Naraka and spend time there? Like, yeah, it's a very interesting concept, because I think in some ways even the Hindus have this concept of, like, even the gods or the work of the gods has negative consequences to it. You still have to pay your karma, right? So from my understanding, the Vasudeva tends to be the one that does the killing, actually the action, the negative action. The Baladeva tends to be the one to uphold the Jain ideals of non-violence and things of that nature.
Right, right. So in Jainism, there is no forgiveness for violence, even if somebody does it to maintain the dharma. So Krishna, not Krishna, you know, Vasudeva, incarnations of Vasudevas go to these, you know, different hells.
Yeah.
But only for a temporary, you know, and then they're reborn again.
Yeah.
But this goes with the Jain ideals of peace and non-violence.
Yeah. To me, it's such a fascinating idea, because I would just imagine, like, Hindus hearing about, oh my God, Baladeva or Vasudeva have to go through Naraka or whatever it is, and them feeling angry. But did we ever historically see any violence built around these contentious issues?
I haven't seen though. No, I haven't. The Harivamsa, of course, is composed around 5th century in South India. That's
just
when
the Jain one, right?
Rashtrakutas and Chalukyas, very good relations between these Jain dynasties and Hindu dynasties.
Yeah.
Not much of a violence. Later on, of course, you would see, but not at that stage when these books are being written.
Right. And historically, what was oh, go ahead. Sorry, I didn't mean to.
Sorry. Historically, nations or states that are pressed for resources have more violence. And this is one aspect you don't see in ancient Indian societies. You know, people are actually surprised. Not many weapons are found in Indus Valley cities, and not many weapons are found in all these Neolithic, Paleolithic, and, you know, of course the stone axes and all those are found, but those are like utilitarian, not mainly weapons.
Right.
The things are found, but, you know, they are mostly utilitarian, not aimed at, you know, warfare or, you know, violence. That's one reason people guess that maybe Indian subcontinent was resource rich, that they don't really have to go and, you know, vanquish the other group. And that was true for most of the ancient period. You don't see too much of weapons in prehistoric sites, even in megalithic sites. Very, very rarely you would see. And ancient history, of course, you would start seeing wars, but still not as much as you would imagine in other societies. You know, war is a common occurrence in other societies, contemporary societies.
So historically, I mean, so Jainism and Hinduism have been, I mean, basically around together for maybe 3,000 years, right? If you think about, if Mahavira is probably like 5th century, you know, BCE, at least 400 or 500 years before him has to have been the origins of Jainism, right? So they've been around together for a very long time.
For a very long time, yeah.
What has been their historic relationship, and why is it that you also think that maybe Jains weren't able to become as big, or, I mean, there were for a period of time, but then they shrunk down again. So would you talk a little bit about the relationship between the Hindus and Jains over time?
The relationship, of course, not much violence, and you would see, the Vemulwada Chalukyas that I studied.
Yeah.
You would see Hindu temples as well as Jain temples, Jain monuments that they supported. So I think during the historical period, I don't see much of an animosity between these two groups. And politically, Jainism may be strong.
Yeah.
Their decline only comes after. I haven't studied, Jain history much, so
yeah.
But only later, only after 12th century or something like that. You still have, larger states that supported Jainism in the West. West Coast especially has lots of Jainism. East Coast, of course, Orissa, Andhra, have some monuments, but it declined gradually. And you would hear the story of, how one of the Chalukya emperors adapted Shaivism and other things. But
because I remember the story within, I belong to the Sri Vaishnava tradition, the story of the Hosala kingdom that would have Ramanuja convert the Jain king there from Jain to Sri Vaishnavism by curing his daughter or something of that nature. Right?
Yeah, so, the Rashtrakutas, Hoysalas, they continued very, very strong foundations, but
because I always find like Jainism is really interesting because for me it's even in ancient Tamil literature like Silatpadiharam and its a sequel, it's supposed to have written by a Jain monk, and there's quite a bit of both Hindu and Jain thought that's like flowing through the text.
Right. Yeah.
So on your work on Balarama, how different was Balarama between the Hindu side and the Jain side?
On the Hindu side, you would see the violence. He participates in these wars. He gets angry, and he's also associated with drink. You won't see that in Jain stories. He was, of course, he's associated with Dharma, but more of so he's balancing Krishna. Krishna takes these actions, and he is trying to balance it quietly. So so you won't see lots of violence on Balarama's side.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, it's also interesting because I think in the Mahabharata itself, Balarama doesn't participate in the big war. He kind of goes on his yatra. Yeah. So
that's what I actually thought based on my research. He's more of a deity associated with resources and fertility and resources and providing for the people. You would see, kind of a aspect of that within Balarama. And I also think the drink, probably maybe not drink, but that's his way of providing for the people that's symbolized later on in the stories. That's what I think, because he actually represents the food, resources, and happiness.
Because the
Rama is this bringer of joy, right? So that's what is represented, I think, symbolically. Yeah.
Which makes total sense, right? Because he walks with he's a haladara, right? He carries the plow, which is a symbol of food and farming, and then he's also very famous for taming Yamuna, right? He redirects the path towards a different location. So
So it's a food and drink and bringer of joy, right? So that's the representation of Balarama. It's more about that. And in the Harivamsha, Krishna actually praises him in one of the episodes. And the praise that Krishna gives him actually involves a lot of terms that actually connect him to Vishnu and the earth, abundance of the earth. And so...
Is this the Jain Harivamsha or the Mahabharata Harivamsha?
The Mahabharata Harivamsha, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
No, because it's because later on Balarama gets very much, although he is an avatar of Vishnu in some sense, he also gets very immersed with Shesha, right, and Adi Shesha. And
Right.
do you have a sense of why that transition occurred, or is there?
Yeah. The Sesha and Nagas are also associated with fertility and agriculture, right?
Yeah.
The Nagas are worshipped at the beginning. Nag Panchami is at the beginning of plowing, agricultural season. So somehow Balarama is associated with agriculture and plowing. And the Naga deity is also associated with, plowing and agriculture.
Yeah.
So as an agricultural deity and as someone who is associated with, guarding the resources and then providing food and drink. So Balarama is kind of like a multifaceted deity. That's what my thesis was, the book actually discusses that, how Balarama is a multifaceted deity rather than what we understand him to be. And he's also associated with this time warp, right? His wife, Revati, actually is from another yuga, so and the Hindu idea of time, the millions of years, kalpa and yuga and all this. So she was born and she was ready to be married, and her father visits Brahma. Brahma's time is different, right? He blinks the eye and an era changes, right? His day is one era. So, it was a day by the time they come back. So an era has changed, it's Dwapara Yuga now. So the time warp, so she comes back, but she's from another era. So
she's a giant too. That's how they describe her.
Giant, because as the yugas go, people are supposed to become smaller, shorter. So the story, connects him to, that time warp, and then also connects him to fertility, and connects him to, drink and agriculture. So
which
I think there are many,
Yeah, if you connect to the Adi Shesha, right, or even Ananta Shesha, the term itself, Ananta, right, beyond time, right?
For the time,
It's this connection of that makes total sense. In the Jain version, does Balarama also have the similar relationship with time, or is it only in the Hindu?
Jain version doesn't have it. Yeah.
Oh, interesting. Yeah. So, aside from the work you've done on Hinduism and Jainism, you also spent a lot of time doing work on Narasimha in the Andhra world, which I thought was fascinating.
It's fascinating.
Because it's really interesting, because I feel like Narasimha plays a really big role, primarily two locations that I've noticed in India, which is usually the mountain region, the Garhwal in that region, and he plays a very big role in Andhra. Like, you won't hear many like Tamilians or other parts of the country be their children called Narasimha, but you get that all the time. There's movies called Narasimha in Telugu. So what is the relationship between Narasimha and Telugu and the Telugu people?
In Telugu regions, both states, Andhra Pradesh and Telangana, Narasimha is worshipped in a large scale. After Vishnu, after Venkateshwara temple, third largest temple is Narasimha temple. So second is the goddess temple, Durga temple. And there are many temples in every small town. There is a temple, Narasimha temple, most often. And Narasimha, of course, is associated. I think the sacred geography of India is connected to the sacred geography of Hinduism and the sacred cosmology. And I think somehow the sacred cosmology connects him to the middle region. So Narasimha is in the middle, right? We understand his association with the middle, and he's in between these two eras. The era is changed by Hiranyakashipu, and then he has to change it back. The it's turned back, so he has to turn it back. So he has to stay outside. So he's in the middle, and then he turns it. So the sacred geography of Andhra Pradesh, of course, it's in the central part of India, and Telangana especially is in the central part. And the temples that are associated with Narasimha are located in the mountainous regions. Ahobalam, that's also a popular name given to many people, Ahobala, that is from the temple, the sacred site. So, so the story, Yarrana wrote the poetical composition on the story, and then that's where he took his incarnation, and then he goes to do his meditation after killing Hiranyakashipu. That's in Yadagiri Gupta. That's also a big temple center in Telangana. So, and of course, Prahlada built another one in Simhachalam. So it goes across the places, but most of the places are associated with this sacred geography of being in the middle. This is in the middle of nowhere. So he's in the middle, it's not water, not plains, not, so that kind of symbolism you would see in almost all his temples, and then the location of these temples also. And he's of course associated with Vishnu. So many of the Vishnu temples also have.
Yeah. No, your article is really fascinating. I loved how you connected the middle to also the story of Narasimha himself. He's not one or the other. He's not this or that. Everything he does is in between things. It's like this transitional, like you said, between the age two. But another fascinating thing is, I believe you talked about it, is even though he is a deva, he exhibits these asuric or rakshasic qualities in the flipping of the age. So it's really fascinating how like this. I mean, Vishnu is considered a sattvic deity, right? Very, very peace. But Narasimha is this very fiery, Rodra, very, it's such a juxtaposition. I mean, could you talk a little bit about that?
That's the reason, because he changed, and he assumed this form of being in the middle, right? The transitional form, and he's the lion and the human, and kind of like half and half. Yeah. And the way he is born, also he is from the pillar. The pillar breaks and he comes all that. Middle of the pillar, right? It's nothing, but it's so. So the story represents, the middle, and the middle, of course, is also taken over into the theater aspect of it. The theater festival is actually associated with Narasimha. The Narasimha festival actually is celebrated for 7 days. So the 7 days, of course, are the theater festival.
I see.
In most of the temple sites, and poets like Srinada speak about, going to the temple city for this temple festival. That has the, the literary aspect to it, the theater aspect to it. So theater, of course, theater is where the actors assume this different form. They become different person, right? So they are a different character for the time being that they are on the stage. So the symbolic incarnation of Narasimha is also reflected in the of course the temples, as well as the festivals and the associated rituals of Narasimha. So
his relationship to Andhra Pradesh and Telangana is very deep rooted, right? How far does that go back?
The inscriptions we get from 10th century, later 10th century and all that. But the temples, people say they existed longer than the temples were built. The temple already existed. It was already a sacred site, which was recognized, and then a temple was constructed when the Chalukyas and the Vijayanagara and all these kings were able to find these places and build the temples. But the idea was that they existed before.
Yeah, and I also find it very fascinating how many ways Narasimha is also connected to Rudra, right? He's connected to Shiva in
Yeah.
terms of being like, especially if you look at through the Pancharatra system, Shiva is connected to Aniruddha, and Narasimha is also supposed to be connected to Aniruddha too.
Yeah, yeah. The earliest sculpture actually connects him to the Vaishnava deities, the Panchaviras. From Andhra Pradesh, you have this sculpture, and Narasimha is in the middle, and then there are these Panchaviras.
Who are the Panchaviras in this?
That's the earliest sculptures. That comes from 3rd century.
And who are the Panchaviras in this?
The Aniruddha, Samba,
Oh, the sons of Krishna, Aniruddha, Pradyumna, Samba. And,
yeah.
Okay, interesting. Yeah. I mean, Narasimha also has a very interesting connection to Hanuman, right? And very much so in the Panchamukha form, and there's underlying connection. Do you know anything about that connection and why and how that exists?
I'm still working on this Panchamukha connection.
Yeah.
But I can say about the Shiva connection though. The Shiva connection is of course represented in the temples. The Simhachalam temple keeps him, wraps. Shiva connection you would find in the story also. When Narasimha was supposed to withdraw his incarnation, he wouldn't. Yeah, it's Ugra Rupam, right?
Yeah.
Nobody can make him withdraw. So they request Shiva to actually get him to come back out of that Ugra Rupam, right? So that is there, and also he uses Shiva's weapons, right? One of the stories has him carrying the trident, and and he has a third eye. That kind of symbolism also connects in the stories. But the withdrawal is done by one of the Shiva's forms, Veerabhadra's.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's really interesting to me just because like these lines that we draw nowadays between Vaishnavism, Shaivism, Shaktism, they're all blurred at some level. Like I feel like these are some ways artificial categories that we think about, but maybe in these villages and these traditions, they're way more integrated than we think when we really understand them to be.
Right. So Hinduism is a truly pluralistic tradition. When you see, of course, in the text, maybe you would find, like these arguments and then these divisions and all that. But when you see them in the practice, on the ground practice, so they are much more connected. Temples and the festivals and, and you probably visited South Indian temples. So, Sri Rangam, the Vishnu and Shiva, how they are married, closely connected, the Shakti and Shiva and Vishnu, maybe separate, but separate theology, but they're still connected. So mostly pluralistic understanding of religion in practice.
Absolutely. It fascinates me to no end that even though that you might have like a very strong, for example, like since I know much more about Vaishnavism than I do about Shaivism, but even within the Vaishnavite like Pancharatra texts or even the Puranas in some sense, you will find this desire to integrate Shiva, Shakti into that entire form, right? No one ever says, oh, worshiping Shiva is evil, it's terrible, it's wrong, whatever. It's much more like, oh, he's just the form. It's another way. You can worship him for it's very inclusive in how they're trying to build this, I mean, I don't say theology, but this interconnectionness between everything connected to the land.
Right. It's this idea of one, right? All the gods and goddesses represent this one God, ultimate God.
Yeah.
That you cannot see. So these gods are like, the representations that you can understand.
Sure. So shifting to another topic, and this is kind of a very big pivot, but we'll pivot nonetheless. One of the things I've been hearing about a lot more amongst scholars in private and also in the popular world is the difficulty within academia and the study of Hinduism, and how very much, or Indic traditions, is very much still built on these colonial or Western lenses. and even professors. And I know you are also heading the American Academy for Religion and Hindu Studies and stuff of that nature. How is it that you understand this problem, or is it a problem that currently exists?
It's an issue that Indian academia and those studying Indian culture and history have to do something sooner or later. Because anything that you would try to understand, of course, you have probably interviewed all of them, from Orientalism to Neo science.
Sure.
Our scholars have examined them, and everyone had given the same conclusion. This is a Western interpretation of what Indian culture was supposed to be.
Right.
And we haven't. The scholars or anyone trying to understand from the other side, from India, haven't come up with a dialogue. We need to have a dialogue. Of course, Western interpretations are done.
Yeah.
But what about the Eastern interpretations? What are we doing, right? So the next step. That's what I was trying to present, and I was trying to ask the scholarly community. Okay, right, we have done this, and we have understood how, so what can we do about this? How can we proceed? How can we understand it differently?
So what is the crux of the fundamental, if you can narrow it down to a few issues or a few concepts, what is really at the core of this kind of confrontation or disjunction between the Western side and the native or indigenous side?
The origin itself is the problem, right? As a historian, I see most of this colonialist understanding, and the beginnings of history writing, and the linguistics, history, sociology, and everything, all of the humanities actually that are connected with India, begin with the East India Company. So, of course, you can imagine the lens that they would bring to. So, any research that is funded by East India Company, and any research that was later on supported by the imperial state, of course, is going to be tilted because of the nature of the state. It's not that the scholars are, intentionally trying to, do something. They're also living in it, right? So everybody is living in it. So everybody is living in this colonial culture. The scholars, the people, the state, everybody. So the colonialist origin of this colonial scholarship is, of course, mired in this colonial outlook. Of course, we have come out of it. All post-colonial societies, of course, we are doing it, but all of the post-colonial societies have the same issue. The colonial society actually silenced the native cultures, native history, native traditions. It happened in Africa, it happened in India, and it happened in colonized Southeast Asian states, as well as South America. They were much more changed. India, it's in the middle way. So every culture, every colonized society is, finding it difficult to actually understand and then go back. That's the reason we have this post-colonialist understanding, right? The post-colonial societies are trying to understand and trying to come up with, what it was. Because they were all silenced, their voices are silenced, their texts were interpreted for them by the others, by the colonialists. So where is the native voice? So how would the natives would understand that? So there is a huge gap that needs to be filled, and that's where the work is now. The Indian academia. I'm really hopeful of this new education policy. It gives much more emphasis to humanities and social sciences and the arts. along with professional studies. So I am hoping there will be much more fruitful study. There will be much more critical understanding. What happened until now is the original scholarship is created. Mm-hmm. Original theories are created. The critical theories and all these are actually based in Western philosophy, not in Indian philosophy. So what would Indian philosophy do? How would Indian philosophy understand all these things? And how would, Indian history be? How would the Indian sociology be? How would Indian linguistics be? The linguistics were completely written by outsiders. So new understanding is necessary, but how we do it is also very important. And I'm hopeful that will happen with the new education policy. I'm really, really hoping.
I hope so, but what strikes me as really interesting and kind of somewhat difficult is, all the knowledge systems we have now are, like you said, very Western based. And the assumption inherently within that is this is universal. We have worked out like, for example, higher level criticism in literature or looking at things. We can actually give you the perspective of all this, right? I mean, I don't know how honest that is, but in some sense, what we end up having is an entire world which currently buys into these fundamental first principles in the Western sense of humanities and social sciences, and saying this is universal, and anything that's done by like any other society is parochial or very limited. And for the people within India themselves who have lost these connections to the traditions, and in some sense, the traditions themselves have stalls, right? Like we don't have an idea of how would the thoughts of Shankaracharya or the philosophy of Advaita been able to impact the way we think about science or think about history or think about art. We don't have that because there was a stop in that kind of flow of thought.
Right.
So
we don't study the traditional texts. We don't study anything.
So I guess my difficulty is this almost uphill, almost I wouldn't say impossible because nothing's impossible, but incredibly improbable project that we're trying to engage in trying to gain back our place in the intellectual world within India. Because I don't even now, like a lot of scholars out of India are not, first of all, like I think there's probably really great scholars within India that write in their native languages who study incredibly well, but no one reads their work, right? Because it's in their native languages. And the lingua franca of scholarship today is all in English, where 150 years ago was like German or French, or whatever it is. So that's all changed. So how do you think we can approach this? And how can India, and this is the craziest thing to me, is no one takes the words of Indians in India or even Indians in America unless you toe the line of the Western academia. Like Indians apparently don't know their text as well. Indians don't know the history as well. Indians don't know anything about their society unless the white man has told us. Or someone from the white institution has told us. Which is very scary to me. Like, yeah.
But that's the situation, though. We have lived through it for the last 100 years. So that was the situation. If that has to change, more work has to be done.
Right.
And the issue that you raised, with the languages, I think we are actually getting to a place where you can write in any language, it would be translated into any language that you want.
Sure.
Just like the blogs, the blogs we have, our blogs, have this icon that would automatically translate into any language. So Indian languages, of course, the translator is a little bit difficult, but I think India can work that. As the academia places more emphasis on the humanities, according to the NEP, they're going to place equal importance on the translations and working with the texts, classical texts and all that. So once the translations, once the work on original classical texts begin, once the theses are put in electronic form, I think the change would come. It's an uphill task.
Yeah,
a difficult task, but of course we have a large population and large number of people are working on it. It's not not like before. Before we had only 60 universities that would allow people to work. Now we are going to have more universities, more work, And more, I think the electronic media is going to help us.
Right. I mean,
So this would be this is the kind of like the turning point. I see a like turning point here.
I do too, and I'm hopeful. But it still somewhat flabbergasts me that a lot of Western people or Western academics still buy into like the Hegelian thought that India had no history, right? They were terrible at recording history, and then like Vishwa Aduluri and Jyothi Bakshi had beautifully brought out in their text that this concept of the stratas in the Mahabharata or Ramayana, whatever it is, it's no one can prove it. No one can even give you evidence for it, but it's taken as a fact. It must have been done this way. Because just because the Bible was done that way or someone else was done that way, there's no sense that this could have been by one author or at one point in time. It always appears as if like either we buy into, like, for example, like Newton could have written hundreds of thousands of, thousands of different works, or you could have polymaths and polyglots in Western system, but clearly Vyasa can't be that. Clearly Valmiki can't be that. He must. That just blows my mind that we're not giving these texts, these history, these people the same level of respect that you would give to anyone in the Western world.
Right. That's a colonized understanding, right? The colonized cannot do anything. The colonial leaders would be the ones dictating the terms. So
right. I'm sure, I don't know so how do you deal with it? How do you deal with it being, because I've read your work, and obviously like you are a top-notch scholar both in the Indian sense and the Western sense. You've been trained in both worlds, and you have a traditional background too, I guess, in your belief system and your ideas. But how do you balance it? And then do you feel that you're able to speak your voice, or do you feel that academia restricts it?
Thank you for the kind words.
Yeah.
The academia, of course, by nature, is tilted that way because the theories originated during the colonial period. And the theories that are used to study India are tilted that way because of the colonialism. But that doesn't mean that everybody's trying to put down the Indian theories or Indian understanding and Indian understanding of the text. There are sympathetic lenses. So when we start working, when India starts working, that's where we have to go. We should start producing more, and we should start understanding it in a sympathetic way, and not get bogged down by the colonialist theories. We should discuss them by all means. We should say, oh, this is it. This is what it was in the last 100 years. But of course, this is how it changed, and there is this positive contribution, and of course, this is where we are going now. So we have to place it in the context, and the more we produce, the more translations we do, and the more we write, it's going to change. That's the reason I'm hopeful of this new education policy.
And I'm hopeful too, but sometimes I see these things like, for example, if you write a lot of pro-Hindu stuff, you get labeled Hindutva. Or if you attack Western ideas about what India is, you get labeled Hindutva. Like it's constantly like either you accept what is being told in the past 100 years as being sacrosanct and true and whatever, or you are the enemy. You are like a regressive person. And I find that like, and to be honest, it's sad because a lot of these professors, and I've talked to quite a few of you guys, will say one thing separately, but will not say it in public, because the moment you say that, it's like you get labeled this. And this, by the way, is not just Indian professors, but white professors.
They're labeled even more.
Yeah,
they're seen, as going away from what they learned. So they're labeled even more harshly.
Right.
So Indian professors are the Western professors that come from local Western societies.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter. Anyone that goes out of this framework is labeled and censured.
Yeah.
But the way we have to change it is by producing the dialogue, right?
Mm-hmm.
It has been in a silent mode.
Yeah.
The dialogue has to begin, but when the dialogue begins, it's going to be in a slow way. It's going to be censured.
Sure.
Like Gandhi said, they're going to laugh at you, then they will listen. So it's going to be censured, yeah, definitely. But the more work it produces, and the more scholars that work
Mm-hmm.
on it, and in India, of course, two ways of studying has to develop. The humanities, of course, from the Western understanding of humanities in the universities,
Mm-hmm.
but we also need to have the traditional schools of thought, the traditional schools that we had prior to British education system.
Mm-hmm.
We should allow them also to flourish. Then we can have a healthy dialogue. So if the healthy dialogue happens in India, and that's what comes out,
Right.
we cannot change it outside. We cannot change it in Western academia. We cannot change it in Germany. The dialogue has to be produced in India. The activity has to take place in Indian academia.
Right.
To really be fruitful.
Right.
So the condition that you described now is right. That is true. That's where we are now, because the academia is rooted in this Western philosophy and Western notions and Western frameworks. Anything that goes outside of these frameworks is like it appears like something crazy. It doesn't really seem like So for it to be accepted, there should be a dialogue. The dialogue should happen, where the origin is.
And on that point, I want to take it to maybe an example that we can actually discuss like fully. Aryan Invasion migration issue, right? This is one of the big pillars of much of what we understand about India sociologically, politically, racially. Everything, like in some ways, stems from this central idea of what India historically was and is going to be, right? And you've spent quite a bit of time, to be honest, in the past, I think, a couple of years, writing, at least on Twitter. I don't know if you've done some like presentations on this, but you haven't written a book or anything. So one of the things I want to talk about is that, because you have indicated that for a long time you were proponent of invasion theory or migration theory, but at some point you did not. You changed your view. Can you explain your process in that and what happened and why?
As I read more history, and read more of Max Muller's work also, and towards the later part of his career, he actually came out and said the theory he created was really not a racist theory. He was quite apologetic of it. So gradually, as I read more, as I tried to understand history more, of course, what you read in the book is not what you see on the ground. So this classification of the society, the Aryan race, Dravidian race, or sometimes these Dravidians are, low caste, sometimes these are South Indian, and that kind of divisions you don't see. And there was no concept of the caste is very different. It's not a systematized concept. Prior to British systematization, prior to the census and recording and all that, there were castes, subcastes, and there is flexibility.
You mean Varna and Jati? You had Varna and Jati, yeah.
Even within the caste, within the Jati, there is a flexibility. the subcaste can move within, and also there is different castes in different regions. And some castes actually recruited people into their caste.
Oh,
so,
really?
so it's not as if, it stayed in a fixed frame forever. It changed. People moved up and down. People changed caste. People, when they moved to different place, they actually changed their caste. We have inscriptions for that. We have, stories about that, and ground also reality. Some of the British census takers recorded that, how the caste actually changed and all that.
Sure.
So, yeah. So the jati is not what we see it today. The jati before 19th century is much different.
Sure.
And the jati in 10th century is even more different. In Chola inscriptions, Pallava inscriptions, they say the lower caste people were kept outside. They did not, have the land. But you would see them in land records. The lower caste, so-called lower caste, are actually seen as, selling, buying land. And you would see in these records. So,
really?
The concept that we understand now is much different about the Hindu society prior to the 10th century. And it gradually became more fixed because people were not really moving from 13th century onwards. And of course, after 15th century, there is no movement at all. And there is a resource crunch and more wars. And, so when a society is undergoing through lots of violence, society stagnates. That's what you would see when the British comes, and it stagnates even more under the British because, there is more resource crunch and people are going, poor.
Right.
So the society, changed a lot. It's not the system that, that it was created and then it continued for 40 years.
Sure.
It's not like that. Yeah.
So, I mean,
it's not me saying, even the census takers say that. The British census takers, they record these differences and they talk about it. Yeah.
So getting back to the Aryan Invasion aspect. So how about all the data that the proponents say, the linguistic data, the genetic data, the data of the fact that horses are not found in India,
by now, everybody, all the experts in every field have said there is no evidence. So the linguists have said it. You interviewed, I think, Shrikant Talagari.
No, I haven't interviewed Shrikant Talagari, but I'm going to. But the problem.
So the linguists have spoken, and
the Western linguists don't. The Western linguists, all the Western linguists still think there's Aryan invasion. Like, for example, what's his name, David Anthony. Much of the Western linguistic side, even if you're on the listserv, I used to follow the listserv once in a while back in the day. They would always talk about how it's all a migration. Their Aryans had to have come in, and the genetic data is all mixed all over the map now. Like, if you believe in the migration, then suddenly the data supports you. But if you don't believe in the migration, then it doesn't. So it seems to be like most people tend to support most people outside of India tend to support the migration theory, and a lot of people within India support the non-migration theory. India is indigenous.
In the West also, they are coming to recognize it. And some of these geneticists that you're talking, when the Raki Gari came out, there was an interview with Reich, and there was an interview with Shinde. And both of them said, the Raki Gari DNA actually shows the DNA that evolved, specific DNA, Indian DNA, and then it contributes in a large way to Indian population.
Right.
So, and I don't know who said that. Shinde, I think, he said there is archaeological continuity and we don't see any replacement in any of the places that are excavated up to now. And I did prehistory of South India. So we also see continuity in many of the places that were excavated. And sometimes, they are side by side. They are progressing. One society progresses into Neolithic, the other is still continuing with Mesolithic. But
Right.
still, they're continuous civilizations. No real replacement. So archaeology doesn't show any replacement. The tools and everything is continuous.
Mhm.
And I don't know, because I read it a long time ago, so I don't remember. But one of them also said, for the Bronze Age, there is no civilization in the steppes comparable in complexity and sophistication to Indus Valley.
Right.
So what that means is there is no complex and comparable civilization in the steppes to come and overtake Indus Valley cities or India. So the point of somebody entering India is ruled out by them, by the geneticists and archaeologists that worked on it. And Shinde even went farther, and he said the archaeology doesn't show any replacement, and the Vedic texts talk about the same places that are associated with Indus Valley. The early Indus Valley sites are actually located on Saraswati River, so Sindhu Saraswati. So he says I think they're contemporary, but Vedic texts don't talk much about the civilization because they're not concerned about it. They're concerned about the spirituality and all that. So, but he thinks the Vedic civilization may have followed from the Harappan civilization, the Indus civilization. But I think they probably may have existed as contemporary civilizations because Indus Valley sites we find from 10,000 years ago, and agriculture evolved by itself 12,000 years ago in South India, and of course also find it in northwestern India. So I would think what we are calling as Vedic civilization or Vedic culture is not a separate aspect. It's an aspect of civilization that existed in India.
Sure.
It probably drew people from many parts of India, just like Kashi and these places. They have monastics and yoga practitioners coming from all over India. Then practicing their own yoga and their own theories, and then writing about them. Right. So I would think probably similar style of Vedic understanding might have existed because the Vedic texts don't seem like they are recording everyday events of civilization.
Sure.
They seem like mystical texts, and they also said, we have to trust them on what they said. They said mystical revelations, and they said, they're living in,
Right.
They didn't say we are living in this city and writing the story of this king. Of course, the name might appear sometimes, but right. So they're out of the civilization.
In the recent excavation of Sonali, it's also a very, very strong, I think, position that I think a lot of archaeology can't rebut. In terms of we found a wheel, we found a potential chariot 2000 BCE, maybe a little before, well before the time that the 500 years minimum before the time the so-called Aryans would have come in. Right. So if the original argument is that the chariot would have brought is the indication of the Aryans, then if it was there before, then maybe the quote unquote Aryans were already there. They're from there. Right. But I also think it's fascinating because, why does no one take seriously our mythic memory of Yayati, Yadu, Uravas? We talk in our texts about how we did westward expansion, right? Certain groups came out, and part of me thinks that probably what happened. This is ancient times, like maybe 4,000 BC. They went out and they came back because it talks about them coming back. So I have a sense that we have quoted some of the migrations, but we have no sense of Indians coming into India. Right. Like it's a brand new land.
Right. Yeah. The genetic evidence, of course, the media twists it, in whatever way they want to twist it, but the genetic evidence is very clear. the genetic evidence shows the male DNA as well as female DNA, dating from female from 73,000 years ago and male DNA from 70,000 years ago, I think.
Yeah.
Same range. Of course, all these other later DNA evolved from those, the male C, D, F, and the female M, and then N and R. And you have this pattern of evolution also in India, the new clades that are evolving from these other clades. So the population development, demographical evolution, you can actually trace in India. All of the genetic evidence that was found is actually older. For M, for R, for R1, older evidence actually comes from India. So that shows that, and we know it was the first originally founded, the founders are in India. So Indian subcontinent was founded right after African exodus.
So I mean, but I have a few geneticists friends. So one of my friends, and I do another podcast called Brown Pundits, and that's Razif Khan, and he's spent some time with the genetic data. But his theory is, I mean, based on his study, is that 3,500 years ago, we see a clear impact of some sort of steep people's DNA entering into the subcontinent that has now basically filtered out everywhere. So, but I mean, I'm not a geneticist. I don't know anything about this stuff. Like, I don't know anything. So you've probably studied more than I have. I don't know if you have a understanding of that data or not.
I have, the paper I wrote is between, 2006 to actually 2012. It was actually published in 2012.
Yeah.
So I presented about it and I studied as the papers were coming out.
Yeah.
So from 2006, a lot of studies actually came out.
Yeah.
That was the original theory. The original Struforza, the original theory that they wrote was, there was this migration in kind of like 3,000 years ago, 4,000 years ago, and then replaced everybody. But that gradually changed as more evidence began, as more evidence becomes available. And both of them, the Rakigari is actually a breaking point. The Rakigari shows that, the migration or invasion or large groups of people coming in probably is very limited. And it's not me saying, both of the geneticists, Reich and Shinde, both of them said that in their interview. No replacement or no large-scale migration actually happened for that time period that we originally talked about, the 1500 BCE or 2000 BCE. For that time period, it did not happen. So now they say it may have happened later, 5,000 years ago or 1,500 years ago. That's historical migration that we know. Greeks have come in, 1,500 years ago.
Yeah, well, 2,500 years ago, right? Alexander.
So 500 years ago, the more Iranians came, we know that. More refugees, the Zoroastrian and Arab, and So we know 500 to 1,500 years ago what happened. The original argument was 15,000 years ago. And after this Rakigari, they said that in their interview, and in their paper also they talk about it. So the migrations that said to have happened 1,500 years ago or 2,000 years ago might not have happened. If at all they have happened, they might have been very negligible. And they also agreed. I don't know who said that in both of them. They said there was no parallel developed civilization in the steppes to actually migrate at that time. So there should have been an equally stronger civilization.
Yeah, and you mean 2000 BC, right?
Indus Valley. So the genetics doesn't show it. They said it. And then the archaeologists said that there is no comparably strong civilization to come and overtake Indus Valley and then migrate into India. The Indus Valley actually, slowly went into the India.
Yeah.
And this is not unnatural or unknown in Indian history. In the prehistory, we actually know shifts from one region to the other. You know, the early evidence of early Paleolithic, lower Paleolithic, we actually have in peninsular India, and then in really Himalayan foothills. The middle is, you know, kind of like they're there, but you know, later.
Yeah.
Not really the early phase.
Right.
But as it comes to Middle Paleolithic, more evidence is from Madhya Pradesh. So you won't find more, you know, there is some, it's not that the sites are abandoned, but more development in the central India. So that happens, you know, cultural shifts happen. Cultural shift doesn't mean that, you know, the civilization has been overtaken. They continued.
Right.
But one civilization becomes developing further and developing more, the other place actually, you know, becomes smaller, and then they migrate here, and cultural shifts happen. Cultural shifts always happen. Even now, you know, the modern society, we see cultural shifts happen from south to north, north to south, you know, one industrial city to the other industrial city. You know, the steel cities, you know, we see them decline. And other technological cities become, you know, progressive and all that. So the cultural shifts always happen as resources and agriculture and more newer things develop. But that doesn't mean that, you know, somebody is overtaken. You know, somebody came from Indus Valley and overtook somebody else.
Yeah. So I mean, from my understanding,
we find, you know, weapons, too many weapons, and of course we didn't have too much of a resource crunch. So
I mean, like, here's my understanding. My understanding is the archaeology shows continuous civilization, right? Like, even though there might have been a break here and there because of droughts and things of nature, there's shifts, right? Like you said, cultural shifts. They might move to a different location because the Saraswati tribe, right? And then so they move over to the Ganges plain or wherever, right? But, you know, there is genetic information that people came in, but that doesn't mean anything. That just means people came in. Right. So say even 1,500 years ago, people from the steppes came in. They just came in. It means nothing more about a cultural continuity shift, nothing of that nature. So the way it appears to me is the linguistic argument is very, very problematic from a variety of perspectives. My primary issue is you have the Mitanni culture sitting in Near East, almost in the Mesopotamian region, around the same time as the downfall of the Harappan community, or not the downfall, but the shift, the demographic shift. So my guess is that community moved out of that region, moved towards the the west, went to Mitanni, and they had the kingdom there. Because you don't see really much diffusion otherwise. And even the Zoroastrian texts show clearly a movement out, and Iran is a new region for them, right? Which they're trying to, like, in many ways, like America did, like, you know, we have New Haven, New York, all these places that are connected to England. The Iranian texts show that the same thing they took from what was around the time of what we call the Greater India, I would say, like, you know, up to like Afghanistan regions there, all shifted over to more towards northern Afghanistan into Iran. So the places in India shifted to places in Iran. So we see a migration, at least from that level, from our perspective. And for me, I just fundamentally think that we're just still relying on the dates that makes no sense by Max Muller. Like your original point, like, I don't understand any other science or any other real hard science that says some guy pulled out a random date, you know, out of his back pocket 150 years ago, and still somehow that date still holds. It hasn't shifted. Everything's shifted around it, but that hasn't shifted.
Right. I don't study the Western much, but because of my focus on the Aryan and all this, I studied somewhat. You know, the Mitanni, of course, is dated between 13 to 1500 because we have the letters and the inscriptions and all that.
Yeah.
And the names and all that. And we have this evidence beginning with 1300 to up to Babylonian period. You know, there are Babylonian inscriptions, and there are, of course, her Indus Valley seals are found in Oman and Bahrain. So there is continuous evidence from 1300 onwards and up to 500 CE.
Yeah.
After 500 BCE. So after 500 BCE, of course, it becomes less. We don't know what the reason was. And we don't know which way it happened. And Indus Valley, of course, you know, the Rakhigarhi skeleton was found.
Yeah.
And the Rakhigarhi skeleton matched, and it actually matches with 60% of the 30% of the population. Of course, 60% is from M, and this is the later derivative of that. So anyway, that matches with the majority of population in India, but it also matches with 11 of the ancient skeletons that are found in 2 other sites. One in Central Asia and one in kind of like in the Arab Peninsula. So the evidence is that Indian people of Indian heritage, 11 skeletons is a lot. They say there are 523 skeletons, but we don't know how many of them are from that time period. And we also don't know how many of them are from Central Asia and the Arab Peninsula. So considering the fact that there are 11 skeletons, 11 ancient skeletons, that match with Rakhigarhi profile, I would consider that people traveled westward, and also considering the fact that Indus Valley objects and Indus Valley artifacts are found in the BMAC and all these other sites.
Yeah.
But typical BMAC or other objects are not found in India. So Indians are traveling. Indians are traveling, their genetics are found, and they are found in these ancient sites.
Interesting.
And Indian artifacts are found in these ancient sites.
Right.
And not much is found in India. And the seals, you know, the Indus Valley seals are found in Bahrain and Oman, right? Lots of seals are found, but you know, not many found in Indus Valley cities. They're called Gulf type of seals, so you know, only one Gulf type of seal is found in, you know, Loto. So yeah, so so if you are thinking about that, there are 2 things to consider. 2 things are their things are found, their skeletons are found, and their language is also found. The Sanskrit, you know, the homeland of Sanskrit, you know, the Vedic text actually place it in northwestern India in Indus Valley. Yeah. So all these are found in westward direction. But the first thing that we must consider doing is working on Indian history. Working on trying to decide what Indian history was. Deciding where the early beginnings are, what the contributions of these early humans are, and what the cultural shifts are. And until and unless we decide this, and until and unless we say, you know, this Aryan is not a race, it was a theory, and this is how our history is, until and unless we decide that, we cannot really talk about this outward expansion. We should first know what we're doing here, for sure. And we cannot teach young children these constructed theories as a fact. Right now, we're actually teaching children that these are facts. Yeah. They came and they took over, you know, so this is actually kind of not a good thing for young minds to observe. Such kind of, you know, invasions by race and taken over by other race. The race is also a construct. So we should not be teaching this kind of theories. And we should not be talking about race, you know, to kids in 3rd grade, 4th grade, you know, not a good idea. So Indian history must take care of these things, these colonial things. If they cannot really fully take it out. They should at least say, this is the theory, this is what it was in the last 100 years. Mm-hmm. Now there is no evidence, and this is what we know.
Right.
The evidence has been proven to be contrary. There is no archaeological evidence. Linguistic evidence is shaky, and genetic evidence shows very trace minor. So this is what we can understand.
Right.
Every society evolves with its own strengths.
Yeah.
Of course, there might be some migrations, but that doesn't mean that India has completely changed or India has been completely wiped out and a new civilization began. So we have to change how we teach our ancient history.
Right.
Unless we do this, we cannot really talk about these or what happened outside. Of course, there are Gulf seals. There is Dilmun and all this, but unless we know what is happening in India, we cannot really talk about what is happening outside. We should first know what is happening here.
And I think it's such a difficult upward fight right now, just because I feel like there's so much political investment in this idea, right? Like, because, for example, like, then if there is no Aryan invasion, then what's the Dravidian movement in South India all about? That's a huge problem for the politics there. Or if there's no Aryan invasion, how does caste come about? Because caste is now seen in terms of that. How are North Indians different from South Indians then? Because the way we think about it now, it's all Aryan versus Dravidian, right? And this again is a fundamental, I think, the crux of every problem, at least in a social and political base that we have in unifying and understanding each other across India.
That's what we should get into the text. That's what we should include. We should talk about the Aryan theory, how it was constructed.
Yeah.
How the evidence is disproving it. We should present it as it is.
Right.
And then we should go ahead and present, how the concept of caste is overimposed on, what was there.
Right.
And we should also talk about, how this caste systematized and then how it actually it changed the whole system of jati was much different from what it was. So we could talk about the historical change in the jati too, and also we have evidence for it. Before, we don't have evidence for it. So now we have evidence, how caste migrated and how it happened and all that. So we can include that in the text. We are not saying, oh, this is, that is that, presenting it as it is with the facts is very important. History. And it's important for the children to know who they are. And the evidence, overarching evidence, is that we all derive from the first founders. There might be some, but overarchingly, overwhelmingly, and the differences between jatis, castes, and all this is, not tenable. For example, they talk about, R1 is found in this caste, that caste. Maybe R1 is found in some, but within the same caste, the others that are found are, R and, C and D and F, the older ones.
Yeah.
Not that, they're replaced. You can see the linear development from the founders. Almost a large population. And that's what they agreed after the Rakigari, publication of Rakigari.
Yeah.
The publications before are different, but after the Rakigari, they agreed with that. And they said it explicitly, that the migrations that they thought happened at that time did not happen. So if people are not ready to give it up, they want to hang on to the theory, let them hang on to it, but let's put the facts out. Let's talk about it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Important for the children to know. We cannot keep the children in the dark forever. It's already 100 years. We cannot keep them in the dark for the next 100 years.
Right.
It's important to teach the facts.
Right, absolutely. So I've already taken like an hour and a half of your time, but what are you currently working on, and what are you looking to work on in the near future?
Yeah, but two of my books are almost ready. The India and New History. I use the new evidence and try to present them in this book. So that's already done, but we still have to work on it a little bit more. So it's there. It'll be published soon in a New History, and talks about all this new information. And then the next book that I'm working is on the feminine journeys of Mahabharata, and I try to understand the heroines, not the heroes. All the heroines of the Mahabharata, and how their journeys were shaped in the original text. And then I also try to understand them as they are understood within the culture that we are living now. The heroines are, the textual heroines are not just in the text, they're also in our festivals.
Absolutely.
You have Savitri, you have Draupadi, you have, many of them are still part of the culture. So Damayanti, so.
I mean, I want to bring you back on for that for sure, because I think it's fascinating. But just the point on that, it's interesting to me because Mahabharata is, I have it sitting right here. I read it. I love it.
You cannot read it fully. It's an ocean.
It's amazing. But it's fascinating to me how in no other culture of that period of time, or even into the Middle Ages, do you find the female ability to conversate as they're clearly a personality. They have opinions. Their opinions are sometimes taken, sometimes not, and they're most of the time found to be correct in the text. Right, the way when a woman talks in the Mahabharata, people listen. This to me is so interesting, because you can read the Bible, you can read other texts, you'll never have that. The people are just, they're there for a second, then they move on. Like the conversation between Janaka and Saulabha, is an amazing conversation. You can read nowhere else. Draupadi's chastisement of Yudhishthira, Satyavati, and it's just all these characters have such personalities and voices. It's powerful.
It's amazing, yeah.
Yeah. So yeah. I definitely want to have you on once that book comes out, and then to talk about that, because I think it's, especially in this day and age, it's like something that's missing, right, in the conversation about what Hinduism is, what the role of women was, and how they're perceived in some of the greatest texts of mankind. Yeah. So thank you so much, Professor Vemsani.
Thank you very much for having me on.
Absolutely.
I'm not much of a talker, but you have me get into the subject and discuss.
It's
Thank
great.
you very much.
No, I appreciate it. I've learned so much, and I think my listeners will find this entirely riveting. And definitely when that new book comes out, I want to have you back on. So do you have any last words or anything you want, not last words as in but any last things you want to say?
Thank you. No.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much, Professor.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
यमुना तीरे गायती वनमाली गायती वनमाली मधुरम गायती